The rain had been falling since noon, and by the time Detective Marcus Webb pulled his cruiser onto the corner of Flatbush and Atlantic, the streets of Brooklyn were slick and black as oil. He sat for a moment with the engine idling, watching the yellow halos of street lamps blur in the downpour. 14 years on the force. 14 years of the same corners, the same faces cycling in and out of the same precinct doors. He knew this neighborhood the way a surgeon knows a body. Every vein, every pressure point, every place where something could go wrong. His radio crackled. Dispatch had flagged a string of armed robberies moving north along Atlantic Avenue. 3 incidents in 2 hours. Same description each time. 2 males, one in a red hoodie, one in a black jacket with a white stripe down the sleeve. They were hitting bodegas, pulling weapons, taking cash and phones, leaving clerks shaking behind counters. The last clerk, an older Dominican man named Rodrigo, had been pistol whipped hard enough to crack his orbital bone. He was at Kings County Hospital now, his daughter sitting beside him, holding his hand. Marcus had taken that call personally. He stepped out of the cruiser and turned his collar up against the rain. He wasn't supposed to be working this stretch alone. His partner, Dinapoli, had called out sick that afternoon. Marcus had radioed for backup twice already, but the night had gone sideways all over the borough. There was a stabbing in Canarsie, a domestic situation in Crown Heights that had turned into a standoff, and a multi-car accident on the BQE that had units tied up for blocks. He was, for now, working with nothing but his radio, his instincts, and the Glock holstered at his hip. He walked slowly, staying close to the buildings, reading the street. Marcus Webb was not the kind of man who looked for trouble. People who knew him, really knew him, would have described him as deliberate, quiet in the way that deep water is quiet. He coached youth basketball on Saturday mornings at the Marcy Community Center. He called his mother every Sunday. He kept a photograph of his daughter, Imani, tucked inside the sun visor of his cruiser so that her face was the last thing he saw before he started every shift. She was 9 years old and had recently lost her 2 front teeth and thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened to her. He thought about her smile now, walking through the rain. 2 blocks north, a light flickered in the window of a corner bodega. Marcus slowed. The gate was half pulled, the kind of position that meant someone had entered in a hurry. A hand-painted sign above the door read Lucky Star Grocery in red letters. Through the glass, he could see the overhead fluorescents stuttering, and beneath them, a cashier with both hands raised. Marcus keyed his radio quietly. "This is Webb. Possible robbery in progress. Lucky Star Grocery, Atlantic and Bergen. Requesting immediate backup." He didn't wait for confirmation. He moved. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then the one in the red hoodie swung his weapon toward Marcus. The shot that came out of that moment was not a decision so much as a reflex, the product of thousands of hours of training that had been built precisely for this fraction of a second, where thinking was a luxury nobody could afford. Marcus fired twice, center mass. The man in the red hoodie dropped. The pistol skittered across the linoleum floor and came to rest against a rack of lottery tickets. The one in the black jacket bolted for the back of the store. Marcus followed, moving through a narrow corridor stacked with canned goods and cardboard boxes, the fluorescent night overhead going from flicker to darkness and back again. He could hear the man's boots on the floor ahead of him, the crash of something knocked over, the slam of a back door thrown open into an alley. The alley behind Lucky Star was a canyon of old brick and fire escapes, the rain coming straight down between the buildings. Dumpsters lined one wall. A cat screamed somewhere above them and disappeared. Marcus came through the door with his weapon drawn, and his eyes scanning in the practiced sweep he had learned so long ago it felt like breathing. The man in the black jacket was pressed against the far wall, 20 feet away, his own weapon raised. "Drop it," Marcus said. His voice was flat and even. "Drop the weapon. Get on the ground. It doesn't have to go any further than this." He came through the door, low and fast, hand on his weapon, badge raised. "Nobody move." The scene crystallized in an instant. Behind the counter, a young woman, couldn't have been more than 22, stood with her hands above her head, tears running down her face. In front of the counter, two men, one in a red hoodie, short and wiry, holding a pistol aimed at the cashier's chest, the other in a black jacket with a white stripe down the sleeve, taller, broader, half turned toward the door with a bag already in his hand. The man didn't drop anything. His eyes were wild. He was young, younger than Marcus had expected, up close, maybe 24, 25. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead. His hand was shaking. That wasn't necessarily a good thing. Steady hands could aim. Shaking hands could do almost anything. "I can't go back," the man said. His voice came out high and cracked. "I already been inside twice. They'll bury me." "That's not your call to make right now," Marcus said. He kept moving slowly, angling to the left, trying to reduce the distance without triggering anything. "Right now, the only call you make is whether you put that gun down. That's it. That's the whole decision in front of you." Something shifted in the young man's face. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like he might. His arm dropped an inch. His chin trembled. Then, from somewhere behind Marcus, a door swung open. Marcus never saw who came through it. He heard the shot before he felt it. A flat, hard crack that bounced off the alley walls and faded into the rain. The impact came half a second later, low and to the left, somewhere between his ribs and his hip. It spun him. He went down to one knee on the wet asphalt, hand catching himself against the ground. He had enough left to fire twice more. The man in the black jacket folded against the wall and slid to the ground. Marcus turned toward the door. A third man, someone he had never seen, someone dispatch had never described, stood in the doorway with a smoking pistol. A lookout, a detail nobody had known about. He was already raising the weapon again. Marcus fired once. The third man fell. And then Marcus Webb sat down on the wet ground of that Brooklyn alley, his back against a dumpster, rain falling on his face, and he put his hand against his side and felt the warmth spreading there and understood what it meant. He had understood what that warmth meant since his first year on the job, when he had watched another officer bleed out in a parking garage in the Bronx and had stood there helpless, pressing his hands against a wound he couldn't close. He reached for his radio. Got it. Keyed it. "Officer down. Alley behind Lucky Star Grocery, Atlantic and Bergen. Officer down. I need..." His breath went strange on him. He steadied it. Started again. "I need a bus. Fast." He set the radio down on his knee and looked up at the sky. The rain was easing some. Between two buildings, through a gap in the clouds, he could see the faint suggestion of stars beginning to show themselves, pale and distant and indifferent to everything happening below. He thought about Imani. He thought about how she had laughed when she looked in the mirror and saw the gap where her teeth had been, holding both sides of her face like she couldn't believe her own reflection. He thought about the way she fell asleep in the car in long drives, her head tilted against the window, her mouth slightly open, completely and absolutely trusting the world to carry her safely to wherever she was going. He thought about Saturday mornings at the community center, the squeak of sneakers on the gymnasium floor, boys who didn't have much learning that the space between where they stood and where they wanted to be was crossable if they moved right, if they were patient, if they passed the ball when passing was the right thing to do. He thought about his mother's voice on Sunday phone calls, the particular way she said his name, not Marcus the way everyone else said it, but something softer, something that made it sound like a word that meant specifically him and nobody else. Sirens were building somewhere to the north, getting closer. He could hear them bending around corners, bouncing off buildings, coming with the urgency of people who still had time. Marcus wasn't afraid. That surprised him some. He had always wondered, in the abstract way that people who work close to death sometimes wonder, what the last moments would feel like, whether there would be panic or peace or some ugly scramble of both. What he found instead was something closer to stillness. Not acceptance exactly. There was part of him that was furious, that wanted more time, that counted the Saturdays he wouldn't see and the Sunday calls that would go unanswered, that ached for Imani in a way that had no bottom to it. But underneath the fury was something quiet. He had come through that door for a young woman with her hands above her head and tears on her face. He had put himself between her and what was coming. He had done, in the final accounting, what he had always done, moved toward the thing that needed moving toward, even when moving toward it cost something. The sirens were close now, very close. He kept his eyes on the gap between the buildings, where the clouds were still parting, slowly, the way curtains part in a theater before something important begins. The stars were there, all of them, the whole cold ancient scatter of them, going about their own long business completely without reference to Atlantic Avenue or Lucky Star Grocery or the rain or any of it. And somehow that vastness, that complete indifference, was not lonely. It was something else. Something that didn't quite have a word for it in any language Marcus knew, though he sat there quietly with the warmth going out of him and felt it anyway, the way you feel a thing that is true even when you cannot name it. The first responders found him sitting upright. His radio was in his hand. His badge was still on his chest, and at Kings County Hospital, where old Rodrigo was sleeping now with his daughter beside him, and where the young woman from Lucky Star Grocery was being treated for shock, a doctor paused in the hallway, head tilted, listening to something on the radio at the nurse's station. He turned it up. The nurse looked over. Someone in a waiting room went still. The news moved through the hospital the way news moves, in low voices, in pauses, in the particular silence that falls over a room when something real has happened and the ordinary business of the world doesn't quite know what to do with itself. Outside, the rain stopped. The streets of Brooklyn gleamed under the street lamps, clean and bright and still, the city breathing around them the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and full in its own grinding way, of people going about the desperate and ordinary business of living, crossing corners where things had happened, carrying forward what they could, the way people do, the way people always do, whether anyone is watching or not. In the cruiser, parked on the corner of Flatbush and Atlantic, the sun visor was still up. Imani was smiling, both front teeth gone, the funniest thing that had ever happened to her.